Can you see what's wrong here? I don't have a coat. Shh! Correct. She doesn't have a coat. Let's fix that. Initially, I was going to alter a trench coat that I found in a charity shop, but after bringing it home and assessing what I need to change about it, I realised that I probably couldn't turn it into what I wanted. Stop it. The coat was oversized and had a slightly velcro-y feel, so it kept collecting little bits onto it which I had to pluck out. The sleeves also only went 3/4 up my arm and it had no inner lining. I'm not one to waste, however, so I put it to the side to use for materials later. Not long after this, Lady Luck blessed me with the sight of someone trying to get rid of a sheet of wool fabric, so I decided to make the coat from scratch. I am partial to formal older styles of clothing, so my first ideas was to make a Victorian style coat, possibly one with a cape like an 1880s altar coat. However, I didn't want anything too costumey, and all the patterns I found were either that or a digital download, and I don't really have the means to print one of those out. I also looked into vintage Vogue patterns, and I did find a few I liked. I thought any of these could have been a good starting point, but struggled to actually acquire any of them. Since I was going to alter the pattern anyway, I didn't want to buy one and not use it properly. I decided to start with a fairly simple base, one button with a more open front to show off my blouses, one similar to the triangle neckline that I often draw my PardusEleos character with. I do this both because it differentiates the black of the coat to the face, and I also just like how it looks. Bonus points because it reminds me of the white neck on Tuxedo Cats. I drew up some quick black and white sketches on Critter while brainstorming what extra details I wanted to add to it. I wanted to incorporate dreams like magic and leopards and stuff, I don't know. It was a struggle to fit that all in, and I settled on this design for now. A simple black coat base with a wing design cut from the bottom. I decided to use the materials from the first coat I mentioned earlier to add splotches along the trim. So, if I'm not following a pattern, how will I know what to do? Well, I have this book titled Authentic Victorian Dressmaking Techniques, which dates from 1905 and will be my main reference during this endeavour. Since I don't have a sewing machine, I thought a book created at a time where everyone hand sewed would be of the most use to me, as modern things I've seen always reference machine stitching. At the beginning of this, the only stitch I knew how to do was the simple up-down one, which I now know is called the running stitch. I was just hoping that my previous experience of sewing tears in teddy bears and patching up holes in trousers would be enough to achieve something wearable. To add to the already difficult task of deciding to make a coat as my first piece of handmade clothing, I'm only going to allow myself to look up anything online if I can't figure it out after a few days, as I feel like I learn better when problem solving on my own. So, according to the book, I will need several sizes of needles, shears, small scissors, tailor's chalk and coloured thread. Enough lollygagging, time to make the pattern. I did try briefly to make one freehand, but oh my goodness, it was impossible. So decided to trace some of the seam lines on a coat that I already owned to get a base to work off of which I could alter. Since the fabric is quite dark, I drew along the seam using tailor's chalk to make them visible. At first, I struggled to see through the paper and had the brilliant idea to wet it with a sponge to make it transparent. As a shock to nobody watching, however, this just caused the pencil to rip the paper. Realising my mistake, I've pinned a fresh sheet down, this time pulling it and feeling for the grooves in the fabric. I lifted the paper on areas where I couldn't feel where I needed to draw and just guessed. Repeating all over, it was tedious but fairly straightforward until I got to the sleeves. I struggled for ages trying to figure out what they would look like opened and lying flat. I gave it my best guess and called it a day. I just kinda left all the paper on my chair. I don't know, as long as it's not on the floor. I've not been filming what I've been doing because I have been listening to my music, but I will show you now. I also have to be very quiet because it is night time and everyone is going to bed now. The rustling of my paper is probably really annoying. I have the pattern out on a massive piece of paper. It's very hard to see. And this is the outline, but what we need is seam allowance. Otherwise it'll be very, very tight. And on my actual coat, at the bottom of the coat and on the sleeves, there's this much overlap. Whereas on the inside, I think it's only about this much. I have made big seam allowance and little seam allowance. The big seam allowance is going at the end of the sleeves and the end of the skirt bit. And the little seam allowance is going all the way around me. And it doesn't have to be perfect, unless it does, and then I'm doing it wrong. That's bigger seam allowance. And this will be little seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch, which I've been told is important. Before cutting out the pieces, I had to test whether the fabric was treated or not. The material felt a little strange and was water repellent, so I suspected that it was, but testing couldn't hurt. Plus, I'd rather be safe than sorry down the line. I ironed, steamed, and washed the piece I cut to test for shrinkage. I did trace the outline of the square before running any tests, so I could compare any deformation that came from it, but fortunately it was exactly the same. The book talked about using a large table to drape the fabric over, but I don't have one big enough, so it's back to the floor we go. I figured out which way the material stretched and laid my pattern with the grain running down towards the bottom of the garment. I pinned the paper flat, but it shifted while cutting, so I instead traced the outline in chalk and used that as a guide. I was kind of nervous while cutting as I couldn't undo any mistakes I might make. I probably could have made a mock-up out of an old bedsheet or something to test if the pattern actually worked, but I didn't. For some reason, I had it in my head that I had to make the stitches really secure, as I was afraid of everything unravelling. I read that a back stitch was one of the strongest stitches and thought that it looked simple enough to do. This would be the only stitch I used for the next few months, as I forgot all the others existed. This black thread I'm using cost more than everything else I'm using for this coat, as it was bought new, and because it's branded, I guess. The brand is Coats, and I bought their heavy-duty upholstery thread after reading about it online. Since it had Coats in the name, I thought it was exactly what I needed, so I used it as my main thread for the whole coat. Well, until disaster struck, but you'll see what I'm talking about later on. I decided to work my way from the centre outwards, so I pinned the back panels back to back and sewed them together. I must have messed up while making the pattern, as the sides didn't quite line up. Eager to get on with it, I sewed where I thought it looked best. After a while, my wobbly stitches began to look more uniform, albeit still a bit messed up. This is what the base looks like inside. Somehow it looks good. Well, good to my knowledge. Time to try it on and see what we're working with. Oh my goodness, what am I wearing? Right, I couldn't find the footage of me trying on the coat at this stage for the video. This video is just one that I took for myself, as I didn't have a mirror at this point. But well, this is what I get for only remembering to wear my best clothes while I'm off screen. And forgetting to actually record me trying it on for reels. Anyway, yeah, it looks very thin, but that's because it doesn't have a lining yet. Apart from that, it fits okay, so I continued on. The collar pieces were really hard to put together. Everything so far could just be pinned together and sewed, but I had to hold the ends inside out to get some semblance of the right shape. After attaching and detaching a couple times, I pinned it like crazy and hoped that it would work. But it didn't. I think I must have made the actual pattern wrong. So I'm going to try and remake it. I gave this a curve because of the way it sits on the back. Once it's all sewed together, it curves. But I think I need to cut out the piece more like a rectangle because it's just not going well. So luckily I have a little bit more material left. I couldn't figure it out, so decided to fake it. I cut out a collar shape out of the fabric that I had left over and sewed a curve outline directly onto it. Okay, so I just spent ages sewing, and I was actually pretty proud of it until I realised that I didn't account for the seam allowance by straight up sewed here, where I needed to sew here, because I forgot. But I'm gonna try again, so we'll see how that goes. I made two sides and then, like it was a pillowcase, attached them inside out, then inverted it. The corners looked a bit lumpy, so I turned them back inside out and cut the seam allowance around the corners to remove bulk and give the ends a sharper angle. Also, this was around the time where I painted my desk. The coat at this point wasn't as bulky yet, so it was nice to be able to sit on a chair with my work in front of me, as opposed to having everything spread out across the floor. I then began to sew the inner panels, still 100% backstitching, even though it took hours upon hours and ate through my thread like crazy. Especially when I had to use my seam ripper to take out a whole row where I messed up. I rounded off the seam allowance inside the inner corners here as well, so it would look the right shape. I tried to get the top of the coat looking the best it could be by evening the armholes and the neck hole before attaching the top of the collar. It didn't quite fit together as perfectly as I would have liked, but I just pinned the pieces at the centre and went from there. I sewed the sides of the top collar to the bottom collar just under halfway. Trying to make it look good on both sides, my goal was for the points of each one to roughly fit together. This took a few tries, but I managed to get it on right in the end. Now we've made the base of our coat, it's time to decide exactly what the trim will look like. The inspiration from an ink spill still held in my mind, so I decided to unpick all the seams and open up the original cheap coat to use as an accent fabric. At this point I was considering abandoning the wing shapes at the bottom to stop the design from being too busy. This way the coat could also be more acceptable to wear out, as it'll be less of a costume and more just a piece of clothing. After laying it down, I drew over a photo of it in Critter to plan out the paint job effect. Since I was really limited in materials, I tested the trim by making a mock-up of tracing paper and pinned it onto the coat. I thought that it looked a bit spindly, is that the right word? It was kind of off and too skinny, so I made another one that consisted of a gradual rise and fall. Because the bottom of the coat is a lot longer when you spread it out, I can't actually just cut the bottom of the other one and stick it on like I planned. So I'm going to take it off in sections and try to arrange it so that it fits onto the scrap fabric coat I have, because I don't actually know if I have enough fabric for this. But hopefully I do, but we'll have to see. This is the extension I've come up with. I decided to do a simple wavy pattern instead of trying to do loads of droplets, just so it's more simple. And then I will just add that wee dark black, and then I'll just add blotches around. And then I'm thinking, as the blotches get smaller, I'll do them like my leopard print desk I painted. I did label them 1 to 10, 11, and then I realised I labelled it wrong, so I relabelled it 1 to 10, because that middle panel's not a panel. This is just the line from this being underneath. These are my sketches. So this is what we have at the minute. And instead of stitching it like I've been doing before, you can't really see, there we go. I'm thinking of stitching it like this, but really close together, so that actually it looks just like this, and hopefully it'll make just a nice thick border. I don't know whether to make the collar black as well, just because this fabric's quite itchy, but in this bit I'm thinking of adding stars, embroidering stars in the black bit, so it looks like I've just tripped into a universe. It's too cool. Wait. Imagine I'm just walking down the street. Oh, a puddle. Menu. Imagine I'm, you know, a vampire. Imagine I'm a vampire going, mwah. Think of how cool. Like a mage. Look at that. Oh, just me and my really long coat. I'm gonna hold this with my chin and hope I can keep the shot. Okay. Since I couldn't figure out how to reverse engineer the sleeves on any of my coats or jackets, I had to look for answers online. After spending the entire day reading about it online and watching numerous YouTube tutorials, I decided to give it a shot. I didn't really understand most of what was being said, so I decided to just visually match what a sleeve pattern kind of looked like. I saw tools that I didn't have and couldn't be bothered to buy, like a tailor's curved ruler thing. To be honest, I didn't even have a normal ruler on hand, so for the straight lines I used whatever straightest thing I could find. Each sleeve was cut into 2 parts. There was some maths involved, but it's been so long that I can't quite remember what I did. I cut the pattern out a total of 4 times, 1 for each arm on both the coat and the lining material. Using coloured thread, I loosely tied the lining pieces together and held them onto the coat to test if they were the right length. Everything was looking good, so I turned my attention to the outer pieces where I planned out the hem of the sleeves. I knew I wanted it to match the bottom, so just had to figure out how to make it seamless once connected. After making the first pair, I cut the pieces out and flipped them, tracing the outline of the reversed image to use on the second sleeve. I moved the inner lining pieces to the side for now, as I'll attach them once the outer layer was complete. I didn't want the ends of the thread poking through and thought it easier to sandwich them in between layers. The outline was a little jagged, so I trimmed them down before pinning. Now on to the fun bit, embroidery. To make the edges of the trim look a bit better, I sewed a border all the way across it. Originally I used the same sewing thread that I was using for everything else, but it was way too small. The tiniest section took forever and it didn't look good. Luckily I had some black yarn left over from when I made the crochet doll, and that worked wonders in comparison. For this I had to use a large needle with this hook tool thing to be able to thread it. I really liked how this embroidered border looked, enough to continue even though each panel took about an hour and a half to 2 hours each. I did the majority of the sewing at night when I could just sit down and do nothing else but sew without being interrupted. Because everything was black, it was quite hard to see exactly what I was doing, so I had to lean a lamp over my lap. The intense light let me see the 3D forms in front of me due to the shadows it created. The fabric and the yarn also was slightly different in how shiny they were, which also helped. This bit was simple, but boy did it drag on. It was slow but mostly smooth sailing until the yarn would snag or one bit would be longer than the other and stuff like that. To make the spots, I just sat and cut shapes out of the scraps of the leftover fabric. I wasn't too fussed about getting them perfect as I wanted them all to be different. I was going for a mix of paint splatter and leopard print, and I'm quite happy with the results. To match what I had already done, these two were given a border. What's up? It's another late night. I've sewed, I don't know how much I've recorded because I don't have that much storage left on my computer, but I've sewed all the squiggly, and now I'm just hand cutting the spots out of scraps I have, and I'm pinning them on, but I've ran out of pins. For me, it's been like months in between each one of these, but for you it's probably been like a minute. What I've basically been doing is every night I've been doing a bit of this, and yeah, it's getting done just very slowly. I thought I'd be done in like a week, and it's been 3 months. I don't know how long it will take before it finishes. I guess it will take me 1 week to finish this. Actually 2 weeks from now. And you put your guess in the description below. And also put your guesses if it's gonna turn out well or if I'm going to ruin it. And this will all be a waste of time. At this point of time I got a new chair, so I spent my free time lounging on it with the entirety of my coat sprawled over me. This was good as it stopped the fabric from being pulled down by gravity and sliding as I worked on it. Since the base of the coat was so much bigger in comparison to the sleeves, the work seemed never ending. When one of the spots sat across the seam line, I sewed an artificial one down it to make it look more cohesive. This is 2 days of work. Now all the outer pieces are done, it's time to attach the sleeves. But since they will be sewed shut, I need to attach the inner lining to them before I can sew it onto the main coat. The guidelines I drew in chalk were rubbing off, so I loosely sewed some temporary thread along them. I sewed the lining to the outer panels, then trimmed the excess around the edges. I've only got this much thread left. It's £11 off Amazon, it takes a week to arrive. But ideally I'd want to get this coat done this week because I've got time spare and I don't want to keep dragging it on. And I've used this to attach these bits, which is very nicely held. But I'm thinking since the sleeves are going to be sewn together anyway, this will be reinforced anyway, so I might just take this cheaper little thread that's weaker just to re-sew all that I've just done for the last day and then go back over it with this while I'm sewing them together. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to pick all of this out on all 4 panels and then re-sew them, which has already taken me 2 days. So that'll be another 2 days, and then I go. Oh, I won't make you watch me redo all that. The only interesting bits was when I kept sewing into my clothes because I was half asleep. Okay, I've just turned the sleeve on inside out. It's looking pretty good. That to the shoulder piece, underarm piece, the seam. This is the hand end. Once it's all sewed, I'm going to flip it inside out and bend these bits back. At the minute, I've just used the temporary test strand because I wanted to make sure it all lines up. And this side lines up pretty well. I just need to close this gap. But this side is a little bit off. But that doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm going to have to flip it back inside out, use the reinforced thread. And yeah, I just need to do this and the other arm, and then I can attach the arms to the body. Easy peasy. Alright, I better get on to that. Okay, previously I did this to make it smooth. So I just took each side and I flattened it down, which is very flat. However, when you put your arm in the sleeve, this is so itchy. But if I just sew it closed like this to make it not itchy, then it's just a raised bump. So what I'm trying now is to just get it and fold it to one side. So hopefully it stays relatively flat, like this. Not as flat, but it stays relatively flat. And then also minimizes how itchy it is. Did I spend a day sewing all of this and all of this? Yes. And am I going to spend today undoing everything and doing it this way instead? Also yes. It's like weirdly, has this weird twist in it. Also it's kind of slouchy. Why is it? This should be up here, but it's not for some reason, so I need to fix that. Out of everything I did to make the coat, it was definitely the sleeves that gave me the most trouble. They laid too flat and drooped off the shoulders. I was going for a more formal look, so I kept fiddling with it until it looked less like a hoodie and more like a coat. Stuck, I was forced to look online where I watched some coat, jacket and blazer sleeve tutorials. At first I sewed rings around the top so I could bunch the fabric, giving it structure like this. That didn't end up working, so I removed them and just tried to brute force it by repeatedly attaching and detaching them until they looked good enough. Until I attached the lining, I kept messing with it in between sewing everything else. So, the sleeves are on, the outer coat is done, we can all go home, right? Wrong. When I tried everything on together, it looked okay, but a bit off. Assessing the situation, I determined that it was the collar that was bringing the look down, with how it sat, and so I searched for something to give it structure. I read about using something called canvas in between layers. I considered cutting up a spare painting canvas I had, but I thought it probably wasn't the same thing the book was talking about. I didn't want to buy an online one and have to wait, so looked around at what I had. In my scrap fabric box, I found a pair of jeans that I was giving to recycle, and thought the material was sturdy enough. I cut open the jeans and laid them out. Because of the strange shape, I couldn't cut out the exact shapes I needed, so I had to just Frankenstein pieces together. I wasn't too fussed about this as it wouldn't be visible. I just had to make sure not to overlap them too steeply or you'd be able to feel the bumps. I sewed on the jeans to the inside out collar and trimmed the excess. Remember that disaster I mentioned earlier? Well, it was here where I realised my grave mistake with the thread. Okay, so I've just sewed this in and flipped it, and then to try and keep it a bit flat and stable, I sewed along this bit, so it's more one piece, and then hopefully when I iron it, it'll be more flat. These bits in comparison now are a bit too floppy, so I'm going to also sew some scrap fabric into this, but I don't have much of it left. So I need to hopefully get this done right first try, because I won't be able to, I don't really want to buy a whole thing of jeans. Because these, I've had these for ages. that is random scrap. But also, more into the issues I have. Look at all this loose thread. This isn't even the bad area. This is just happening. Like, I've not even worn it. This is it just moving around my floor and like me tossing and turning it. But it's all just coming undone. It's literally, even when where I've tied it, it's just slipping out, especially at the ends. Because I'll have an end here, and this one's I've had to tie this one again just now. But it just keeps undoing. And like, this has been triple tied. Look how loose it is. Anyway, I've done all of my sewing with one needle over this past 4 months, and I lost it today. So then I got another needle, and I've lost it. So I've gone from using the same needle for 4 months to losing 2 in 1 afternoon, which is very fun for me. Anyway, yeah, progress is slow. Progress has been very slow because I just do not know what I'm doing. And it makes me a little bit sad when I have to keep spending a week straight doing something and then undoing it just to do it all again. But that's how I learn this stuff. And I probably should have used a pattern or something. But this way, I feel like I'm the caveman discovering fire right now. Like, it's very, very difficult. And everything keeps going wrong, but I'm doing it myself. Is this efficient? No, but it's fun. But anyway, yeah, I need to sew this in, sew that in, trim them. I want to try and connect to this so the collar stays more stable, maybe. Trim it, flip it back inside out, wear the coat to check if it actually works, and then I need to redo all of my sewing the pieces together, except for, like, it should stay kind of together because this is so steady. Wow, it looks glitter. Oh my goodness, this looks well shiny with the flash. Weird. In normal lighting, they look the same colour basically. Yes, the disaster I mentioned earlier was in fact all of my stitches unravelling. I scoured my room for normal black thread and luckily had just enough to sew along the seam lines that were already there. While I was at it, I took the time to fix areas where the seams didn't quite line up. Before I could put the coat on, I first had to flatten the seam allowance on the inside as it was all sticking up. I first tried to sew it flat but couldn't figure out a way for it to not show up on the outside. I then decided to heavily steam and iron them down. This worked an absolute treat. After trying on the coat and pulling it around to make sure it was secure, I then moved on to the final step, sewing on the button. I marked around the button, then sewed a simple stitch around where I wanted to cut. I placed pins on each end so I wouldn't cut past them. Using a seam ripper, I opened a slit for the buttonhole and sewed thread wrapping around it to prevent the ends from fraying. I then tested a couple threads, practicing how to sew it on before attaching the button to the coat. And with that, the outside of the coat is done. It's a little rough around the edges, but I'm surprised it turned out as well as it did, all things considered. I think my favourite part about it was the spots. They took a long time to do, but I think that the time was definitely worth the result. Depending on the lighting, they're either more subtle or they stand out. When they catch the light, the material shimmers slightly, kind of like distant stars. The shininess is probably due to the synthetic material it's made of, but I think it's utilised well as an accent. I think the fit is okay. It's not tight, but it's not just hanging off me like a sheet. Some panels have ripples in them where I got the tension wrong or just the pattern shape. Fortunately, it's not too prominent. I do think I'll need to make some slight alterations, but I'm saving that for part 2 where I make the inner lining. If you're interested in seeing that, maybe subscribe so the video is more likely to come up in your recommended. If you have anything to say about this video or something I could do in a future one, feel free to comment. I am PardusEleos. Goodbye!